So the national park that I chose to focus on is Carlsbad Caverns National Park, which is located in New Mexico, and the challenge that it might be facing is potential gas and oil development in and around the area. So this is a picture from Google Earth that shows above ground of Carlsbad Caverns National Park, which is actually located underground since it's an underground cave system. And as you can see, it's very mountainous and rugged terrain. And on the upper right corner of the picture is the visitor center where you can actually enter the park. This is a picture from the National Park Service website, and it's obviously of Carlsbad Caverns National Park, and you can see the border, which is the red line on the right side of the picture, between New Mexico and Texas, as well as several caves and trails throughout the caverns, and the visitor center is again located in the upper right corner of the picture. So the challenge that this park is facing is potential gas and oil development in and around the park area, and this has both positive and negative aspects to it. For the positive aspects, increased oil could lead to lower energy costs, and jobs could be created for people, and U.S. independence would increase where oil is concerned, as well as landowners would get the chance to earn some extra money. For the negative aspects, however, it could increase pollution problems. Oil fracking could actually end up hitting the city water supply and damaging it, and the park and its resources could end up being damaged as well, and there could be potential health hazards to people who live in and around the park area. And to the right, I included a picture of the entrance to Carlsbad Caverns underground. So first, one of the positive aspects of oil fracking is the lower energy costs and increased creation of jobs. So this all starts with the discovery of fracking, which is also known as hydraulic fracturing, and this leads to the increased production of oil and gas in the U.S. This ends up lowering energy costs, and this in turn gives Americans more money, which they will end up spending, and demand will increase in the economy because people will be spending more, and demand for products will increase. And this leads to higher employment due to the increased demand in the economy, which overall leads to an improved economy. Also, another positive aspect is increased U.S. independence and money for landowners. So, increased amount of oil in the U.S. leads to decreased dependence on other countries for their oil, and therefore the U.S. gets to control the price of oil in the country. Also, landowners have to lease their property to the fracking companies, and they actually have to lease underground, like below their property, in order for the companies to have permission to frack. And if the companies do indeed strike oil, then the landowners could potentially receive thousands of dollars in royalties, and this in turn leads to more money in people's pockets, which again leads to an overall improved economy. Now for the negative aspects. Increased fracking for oil around Carlsbad Caverns leads to increased air and water pollution, and power plants in the area, as well as oil and gas wells and refineries within the area, all lead to increased truck traffic, and gas emissions will overall increase, which is bad for the atmosphere and the ozone. Also, chemicals used in fracking, as well as a disruption in gas and oil deposits when fracking, can end up leaking, and they can infect the drinking water for Carlsbad City, which is overall really bad because it could end up damaging their city water supply. And on the right, I included a picture of the drilling well and how the fracking chemicals could end up leaking underground and infecting the drinking water aquifer. Also, another negative aspect of fracking is the damage to the park and its resources, as well as increased health hazards for the population who live in and around the area. So an oil spill would be devastating because it could destroy the groundwater and it would extremely harm the ecosystem, as we've all seen the effects of oil spills in the country. Also, millions of gallons of water are actually wasted during the fracking process. Up to 5 million gallons of water are used per day to frack for oil. There are also unknown effects to the underground caverns as well as the city, so no one knows if there could be a possible cave-in to the caverns or damage to the beautiful cave formations such as the ceiling stalactites or the stalagmites, and there's also a known hazard of a sinkhole possibility in Carlsbad city, and that could end up collapsing if oil fracking goes wrong. Also, as I mentioned in the previous slide, fracking fluid could end up leaking into the groundwater, and it contains benzene, toluene, and formaldehyde, which are all toxic chemicals that people would end up drinking if it leaked into the groundwater, which would severely damage their health. Also, statistics have shown that babies born within 3 kilometers suffer from poorer health, whether from the air or water pollution, so fracking definitely has its downsides. Next, I'll focus on the geology of Carlsbad Caverns, and it all started with the Permian Age, where the Capitan Reef was located in a shallow sea and led to the creation of limestone. And the caves were actually formed from the breaking down of this limestone and led to speleogenesis, which is the growth of cave formations. And I included a picture of the inside of Carlsbad Caverns. So first, you have to look at the beginning, which is the Permian Age, and this is when there was a shallow inland sea that contained the Capitan Reef, which is where Carlsbad Caverns is now located. And on the right, I showed a picture of what Capitan Reef supposedly looked like. And it was mostly composed of sponges and algae, not coral, which is unlike our typical reefs today, which contain coral. Also, many of the marine fossils that were included were ammonites, bivalves, brachiopods, crinoids, nautiloids, snails, and trilobites, as many of you have probably heard of. The coastline led to the creation of limestone that ended up being 1,800 feet deep, 2 to 3 miles wide, and over 400 miles long. This reef, by the end of the Permian Age, was covered in sediment and buried deep below the surface. However, faulting, folding, and overall stress to the Earth's crust ended up unearthing the ancient reef. Next, we'll talk about the formation of Carlsbad Caverns, which started with hydrogen sulfide-rich water traveling underground through the limestone. This hydrogen sulfide combined with oxygen from rainwater, which led to the creation of sulfuric acid. This acid dissolved the limestone along cracks, folds, faults, and fissures, and that's how Carlsbad Caverns was slowly and painstakingly formed. Gypsum deposits, clay, and silt were all left behind as evidence as to how Carlsbad Caverns were formed. And to the left is a picture of the Chandelier Ballroom in Lechuguilla Cave in Carlsbad Caverns. And what you're seeing is beautiful white gypsum deposits, and these gypsum crystals were supposedly some of the largest formations in the world. Lastly, speleogenesis, which is the creation and formation of the caves, and it started with the collapse of the entrance to the underground cave system and surface erosion, which ended up creating the current natural entrance to the system of underground caves. due to the collapse, airflow started to travel through the caves, and this led to the final stage of growth for Carlsbad Caverns. Speleothems, which I mentioned were cave formations, start with rain and snow melt soaking through limestone, and this water drips into the caves and it ends up evaporating. As the water travels down underground and through the limestone, it picks up minerals, which are carried to the underground caves and left behind when carbon dioxide is released into the air from the evaporation of the water. What's left behind is usually calcite, which is what most of the formations in the caves are composed of. Some of the ceiling formations include curtains, draperies, ribbons, soda straws, and stalactites, and as you can see in the picture above, soda straw, stalactites, and columns are very thin and fragile. And some of the ground formations include cave pools, flowstone, lily pads, rimstone dams, shelves, the common stalagmites, as well as totem poles. And these are all of the resources I used for my project to find out information on Carlsbad Caverns National Park.